In 1997, the Nintendo 64 would release what would eventually become one of the most recognizable and entertaining first-person shooters of that era. It was a game that came out right around the days of the Lost World Jurassic Park, as well as Quake, Doom, GoldenEye, and of course, the rise of 3D game engines. It was a massive success and one that I personally have an extreme level of nostalgic attachment to. I can remember being a little kid and seeing the box art of a man with a knife going up against a velociraptor while roaming the aisles of Blockbuster and just having my mind blown at how cool that whole situation looked. I begged my parents for a Nintendo 64 just so that I could have the opportunity to play the game in the late 90s. And you know what my dad said? He goes, "Son, I'll tell you what, I'll make you Turok Dinosaur Hunter." To which my dumbass replied, "Really, Dad? That's so cool of you. I can't wait to play it." Of course, the day finally came when he asked me to draw a picture of the game before he glued it to a cardboard box and cut out a makeshift joystick to entertain me with. That was the day I realized Dad did not know how to make video games. So what is Turok? What's the story about? Who is this dude that you've seen in video games before? And why do people still talk about him to this day? Well, to answer all those questions in as short of an amount of time as possible, here's the deal. Turok is a media franchise centered around a Native American man who crosses over into a dinosaur-infested world known only as the Lost Land. The character first appeared in 1950s comic books that eventually got acquired by Valiant some years later, and then finally turned into a very popular acclaimed video game series that has sadly all but vanished. That being said, you can play the original Turok Dinosaur Hunter video game on a wide variety of platforms. Right now, I currently own the game on Nintendo 64, PC, and the Switch, but it's also available for the Xbox One. Now, in my lifetime, I've beaten this game tons of times, and I can honestly say that if you're looking for a really good first-person shooter in an arcadey setup that doesn't really focus on story whatsoever, you're going to have a lot of fun here. Essentially, the game is broken down into 8 unique levels: the hub ruins, the jungle, the ancient city, the regular ruins, the catacombs, treetop village, the lost land, and finally the final confrontation. While embarking on your journey throughout these levels, you'll encounter a wide variety of enemies that are trying to kill you. These include rival soldiers, Dimetrodons, velociraptors, mercenary mounted triceratops, killer plants, witch doctors, and even a cyborg Tyrannosaurus Rex. Everyone within these worlds is solely dedicated to killing you in order to protect the big baddie in this game's story, who is known only as the Campaigner. He's basically a combination of the Terminator and Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat. In the game, he wants to take over everything by finding all of the pieces of a mystical weapon known as the Chronoceptor, which he then plans to destroy the barriers that separate the ages of time and rule in chaos. You play as a man named tal'set, who has recently taken up the mantle of Turok, which is a Native American legend passed down to the eldest son. It's your job to protect the lands from the likes of madmen, aliens, and dinosaurs. Basically, what the game makes you go about and do is just run around each level collecting keys to gain access to the next location. On your way, you blow up anything in your path and have fun doing so. The game controls extremely well and actually plays far easier than you'd think if you've yet to pick it up and play it for yourself. One of the things that I think you'll notice the most upon your first playthrough, though, is arguably one of the greatest first-person shooter arsenals you can find in any game at the time. Iconic weapons like the tech bow blow up people like Rambo does in First Blood Part 2. The minigun fires a good heap of ammo at enemies in a way Jesse Ventura would be happy with, and even the basic explosive shotgun becomes freaking awesome to play with as soon as you get your hands on it. And trust me, if you think this is good, it only gets better from here, since Turok 2 has arguably one of the best weapons lists in like all video games ever. Personally, I've always felt that levels like the Ancient City and the Lost Land are where the game shines the most, since you get bombarded with loads of enemies that run out of nowhere and try to swarm you without a moment's notice. This is also where I think the game's incredible soundtrack is also the most notable to the player. There are some other areas though that slow things down and take on a more horror feel though that I personally think aren't as strong, such as later places of the ruins or the catacombs. And the final confrontation is, in my opinion, probably the weakest part of the game until you get to the two final bosses. With that being said, if you're someone that never got around to playing Turok on the N64, or maybe you're thinking about buying it remastered now, I can't recommend it highly enough. This is a damn good video game and a super fun one at that. Had it not been for the fact that it was soon eclipsed by the release of GoldenEye just a few months later, I honestly think Turok would be a much more successful series outside of the 90s, but, well, GoldenEye was blowing up crazy back then. If you're curious about what the wider series is also like, I'd recommend checking out some of the Valiant Age comic books, which I've actually collected some of myself, but the older 1950s stuff is obviously uber cool too. One thing that I think you oddly shouldn't expect from this game is a legitimate dinosaur-focused experience. Dinosaurs are deliberately in the game, and Turok does indeed hunt them, but they aren't really what the story is all about so much as they are a background prop that was revitalized to bank on the success of Jurassic Park. That doesn't mean that they're not cool when you actually get to see them, but most of these guys are either made up or super science fiction heavy. For example, velociraptors start carrying guns in later levels, and creatures like the Leapers don't really even exist in real life whatsoever. That being said, this shit is still cool as hell. Turok Dinosaur Hunter is a game that I've loved forever, and it's one that I think you guys should play immediately if you haven't already. Just do yourself a favor, pick up any copy, and have fun with what the devs created. This is a lean, mean shooter made for the N64, and it's about as 90s as you could get. Definitely a must-have in my opinion.